If you don't know me, I'm Kika, just in case you forgot, you have amnesia or something. I'm Kika, and I'm so pumped. Literally tonight, I've been praying about tonight, and I think as we go into our last one of the year, and we've had just so, like, this is a roller coaster of emotions, and mostly just good emotions, but it's like, it's happening! What do I do? But it's happening, and it's here, and we've just seen so many new faces and faces that we haven't seen in a long time, and just no names, Yusuf. Just people who are coming in. We're just so pumped that you're here, and I think that tonight is going to be a special night. And so, as we get started, I just want to share. So, when I was in college, about 4 years ago, or however many years ago, I was really involved in this thing called Young Life, and some of you know this story. And I was going to Young Life Camp. And Young Life Camp is literally the best thing that Young Life does. And so I'm really pumped about this. And we're on the bus, and it's like a 5-hour bus ride. I'm taking kids from Lynn with me. And so we get up there, and the kids are already starting to get like playing with, there's like water skiing and snowboarding, every possible thing you could ever imagine in this one camp. And these kids are off, and so they gather all the leaders, and they're like, all right, sit down in this room. And we're sitting in this room, and they start to tell us, all right, guys, here is the first thing that we are going to do together as a camp. And so I'm like, oh, yeah, Young Life Camp is incredible. I'm so excited for what they're going to say. And so we sit down in this room, and they start to tell us something, and half of the room is excited out of their minds. They're like, yes, this is the best thing ever. And the other half of the room are like, this is horrible. Like, this could not possibly get any worse than what you are telling me right now. And so here's what they start to tell us. They're like, all right, guys, here's what's happening. Tonight, when the lights go out and the sun goes to sleep, we are gathering our whole group, and everybody, you are going to go with your cabin, and you are going to come out. We have in the backyard of the camp. So we have the camp, which is Camp E enough. But then we have the backyard of the camp that we have made the muddiest, most wet area in the entire region of New York. And we want you to take your kids on this incredible, muddy obstacle course. And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, this sounds horrible. Like, why do you want me to go through this wet? Like, the only time that I don't mind being wet is when I'm in the shower, when I'm in the pool, or when I'm in the ocean. Like, other than that, I don't want to get wet. I don't want to get muddy, like, let alone with my kids who I'm trying to give a good time here, and you're telling me go in the mud. And so I'm sitting here, and half of the group is confused, and half of the group is like, yes. And so we're sitting there, and finally, the guy tells us something that changes my perspective on the entire situation. And so he says, all right, guys, here is why we are doing this. And so he starts to explain, and he says, listen, you are coming up here to this camp with a group of kids who, one, some of them don't even want to be here. Two, they don't trust you. Some of them, they've known you for a little bit. Some of them don't know you at all. And three, they're just kind of like enclosed. And so immediately I start thinking of my man Leroy, right? So Leroy is not even his real name, but he called himself Leroy throughout this whole trip because he doesn't trust people. He's like, I'm not telling people my real name. I'm Leroy. So call me Leroy. So I'm going to call him Leroy tonight just for the privacy of his sake. So Leroy, I start to think about Leroy, this kid who all the way up the 5 hours, he's just sitting there with his headphones on, wearing his J's, like, doing my thing. Not talking to anybody. He's just closed in. And the guy continues. He's like, listen, these kids coming from maybe a little bit of a tough background. Some of them had to grow up faster than they should have. They haven't had an opportunity to be kids. Every single week, now they have to work extra jobs because their dad left, or maybe they have to take care of their sister because their mom works 3 jobs or whatever. These kids haven't had a chance to be kids and grow up and have a childhood. And this is an opportunity where they get to have fun and go and jump in puddles and mud. And so he starts to explain the why, to why we are doing this. And as I think about Leroy, and as I think about, man, he really is a kid who is a little bit hard on the outside and maybe the inside. And maybe he's got stuff going on at home, And maybe this is something that could start to open the door. Because as we go on throughout the week, we're going to have conversations about life, and we're going to have conversations about faith, and how can I get to that point if this kid is just hard and doesn't want to talk the whole time? And so this leader tells us, listen, these kids, we've done this time after time after time, and this 99% of the time has cracked the shell with so many of these kids. So I'm like, cool motivational story, man. Like, I still don't want to get dirty. Like, do you know how difficult it is to get mud out of my hair? Like, this is okay, whatever, but I'll give it a shot. So we go and we get back to our cabin, and it's our group, and we're sitting down, and I'm like, all right, guys, I have a really exciting thing for you. We're going to go do this obstacle course. We're like, all right, whatever. So we put on some dirty clothes, and we go back to the backyard, and we're standing there, and we run up to the front of the line, and we get to the table where the start line. And it's a big table, and they have 2 buckets out the front. And the buckets are filled with mud, just in case you want to pregame, you know. So they got mud, buckets of mud, and the guy standing there, he's like, all right, guys, here's the deal. You all here are about to go into this wilderness expedition that's full of dangerous people and dangerous things, and they're shooting stuff at you, and your mission is to protect your leader. And so all my kids look at me and look back at this guy, and then I see Leroy, my man, who's hard on the outside, got his headphones on. He digs his hands into these buckets and just digs his hands all over everyone else, and he starts to chant. He's like, protect, Kika, protect, Kika, protect, Kika. And then they start running, and we're running through this obstacle course, and Leroy is diving in front of me as these guys are shooting me with these water guns. He's like, never! And he's protecting me, and every time we get past an obstacle course, I'm like, all right, can we please be done? And I look at Leroy, and every time I don't want to do this, I look at him, and I'm like, he's the reason I'm doing this. There is something behind this thing that I don't like, that I'm not a fan of, that I am not willing to keep doing, but I see something through it. And I look at the obstacle and I see a problem. But the goal for me is to see the purpose through the problem. And when I heard this man telling me about how this is going to change the outside and the heart of this kid, and when I heard how, and I start to see the shells start to fall off of Leroy, I started to see the purpose through the problem. And I had a purpose perspective. I had a purpose perspective. And that's what I want to talk about. And that's how I want to end the year together at Lighthouse is we've talked about purpose. We've talked about having a permanent purpose. And every time I talk tonight about purpose, here's what I want to tell you. Purpose can so often be something that's passing. And we talked about that this first time together. It's something that we look at and we strive for, and then we get and we achieve, and then after a while it just dissolves. But there is a permanent purpose. And through every problem and through every mundane thing, I promise you there is a permanent purpose. He is Jesus, and we are going to look at him and how people can see their purpose through their problems, through their mundane together tonight. Is that cool? Yeah. All right, great. So we're going to we read this together, so we're going to keep reading together as we think about how can I, as a person who has struggles with, things come up and problems come up, and I feel like nobody's seeing me and nobody cares, and is anybody seeing it? Does this have any purpose in my life? We're going to look at a story that kind of gives us insight into this issue. All right, so here's how it starts. And we read this together. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, and while he dismissed the crowd. So Jesus says, all right, guys, my 12 friends, get in a boat. I'll see you in a little bit. They get in a boat. They start going. All right, keep going. And then, after he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, this is no small storm. This is no little, rain and clouds. This is a legit, it's hard, strong winds. And by the way, this sea of Galilee where they're at right now, it's like kind of like in between these two mountains. So the wind it's super strong right there. It's like a funnel. It's just right through it. And that's why there's constantly storms. We see storm after storm in this story. So there's this massive, massive storm happening here. All right, let's keep going. Shortly before dawn, which by the way, this means sometime between 3 and 6 a.m. So it's most likely very dark. So it's not only is there a big storm, but it's also most likely very dark. Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Now, we just read this earlier, and we're like, we're walking on the lake. All right, cool. Oh, yeah, he's walking on the lake. All right. Anyway, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. It's a ghost, cried out in fear. Now, here's my first point that I want to talk about tonight. Having a purpose perspective helps you see, I think we can put it up, having a purpose perspective helps you see who Jesus really is. Purpose perspectives helps you see who Jesus really is. Now these guys, they're on the boat, and they're in the middle of a storm. They have a problem, and they are terrified, and there is fear. And in this moment, while they are struggling with these things, they are allowing their problems to be the perspective that they have for the things around them. They're allowing their problems and their fear and the things that they are terrified of to be the perspective that they perceive. So they see a ghost. But listen, these guys have been around Jesus for a long time, and they know who he is, and they've seen him do miracles, and they've seen him raise people from the dead and heal people who are sick. And so they probably know that Jesus is a guy who can walk on the water. Like, if I were in their shoes, I probably would feel the same, but someone who is a little more mature than me, like Freddie, would probably be like, oh, that's Jesus, Like, he says, obviously, this is Jesus. So, but these guys are terrified, and even though they know that this is probably, like, it could be Jesus, they have seen him do incredible things. They have allowed their situation, their problem, to become this perspective by which they see the world around them. And so we're going to keep reading. So let's go on. And then listen to what happens. This is kind of like what Natalie said earlier. It said, but immediately Jesus said to them, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. And let me tell you, this is like a translation from the Greek to the English, but here's how it was really said. And you might catch this, and you might not, and if you don't, that's okay, I'm going to explain it. But here's what Jesus really, really said. If we're to take back the original thing that he said, take courage, I am, do not be afraid. Take courage, I am, do not be afraid. Now, for most of us, that's grammatically incorrect, sir. But here's what's happening here, right? Back thousands of years ago, there's this man named Moses, and Moses was sitting by a fiery bush that was not burning, and he was entering into the presence of God, and he started to talk to God, and he was like, who are you? And God was like, and he was asking God, he's like, what is your name? Like, who are you? And God above answered him. And he said, my name is I am. And so what's happening here is Jesus is trying to correct their perspective. So you've got a wrong prescription on. You don't see things the way that I want you to see them. Listen, take courage, I am. Do not be afraid. And I love it because it's like a sandwich. The meat is right in the middle. The good stuff is right there. Take courage, cool. Why should I take courage? Why? How can I take courage when I see the problems and the fear and the things happening all around me? Why? Because I am. Don't be afraid. Jesus starts to correct their perspective. And listen, when we have a purpose perspective, we can see who Jesus really is. And even last time we were here, this is, like, God's doing some cool things, but last time we were here, I was having a conversation with somebody, and my friend was like, listen, man, I came to church and I knew God and all that, but I'm really starting to have some doubts. Like, I don't really know, like, I don't know what I think about God anymore. I'm like, all right, that's cool. But listen, guys, like, this is what's happening. Listen, there's in John 10:10, we read that there is a thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And listen, that thief is trying to steal your purpose. He's trying to kill your purpose. He's trying to destroy your purpose. And the first way he's going to try to do that is he's going to try to blur who Jesus is to you. But when we have a purpose perspective, we start to see who Jesus really is. We are not jaded by the world and what the world has to tell us, because we see, listen, no matter what's going on, no matter the problem that I have in front of me, I will not allow my perspective, my purpose perspective, to become a problem perspective, and everything that I see is based on the problem that I'm facing. All right, so let's keep reading. So this is cool, right? So Jesus tells them, it's me, it's I, don't be afraid. And listen to what happens next. What happens next is now Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends, says this. He says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And so Peter's one of the guys on this boat, and he, I believe, starts to have his perspective corrected. He starts to see Jesus as who he really is. He starts to have that purpose perspective. He's seeing Jesus as he really is. Now here's our second point that we're going to talk about. Purpose, a purpose perspective lets us walk through the worst of storms. So many of us have storms. Many of us have things that we go through. And I believe that as we're about to unfold in the next couple of verses, that a purpose perspective, one focused on our purpose in Jesus that is permanent, lets us walk through the worst of storms. So Peter has his lenses corrected. He says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come on the water. I trust that if it's really you calling me out there, I'm going to take a step, because I believe that my purpose is found in you. And I'm going to take that step, and I'm going to start to walk because I'm focused on you and not the problem. So let's see. Let's see what happens. Verse 29. Come, Jesus said to him. All right, great. You ready? Come on out. Then Peter got out of the boat. So this boat's like this big, it's like comes up to here. He pulls up his galabea, if you know what that is. It's like a dress, kind of. That's probably not appropriate, but it's like this thing that Arabs wear. So he pulled it up. He went over. I can't do it because my jeans are too tight. And he went over this thing, and he's standing on water. Like he's standing on water. And I picture him holding on to this boat, but his perspective has been corrected. So he's standing, and what I believe is happening here is he is looking at Jesus. Now, there's no physical evidence of this right here, but I believe this is what's happening. Here's why, right? So a year ago, Rachel and I, we had just gotten engaged, and we went out with her family to Yosemite State Park. Big mountains, big trees, kind of like that mud obstacle course. And we were out there, and there was this lady. She probably was she's brave. Anyway, I'll just say that. And it's a 3,000, 4,000 foot drop, like sheer rock. And she thought it was a great idea to say, hey, why don't I put a rope in between me and the other side of the cliff and try to walk on it? I'm like, yeah, man. All right, so she puts this rope across this sheer drop. Like, lady, like, if you fall, you will die. Like, there's no question about that. And she puts it down, and she ties it, and her husband or boyfriend, whatever it is, that guy is standing on the other side of the rock, and she starts to walk on this tightrope. Now, sure, she's like clipped in, so if she fell, I would die probably watching her fall, but she would survive, hopefully, if the rope doesn't pull out. She's there, and what I thought was so interesting was this lady never looked down at the rope. She had her eyes set on her husband, and she's walking like this, looking right at him, right in his eyes. She's balancing, but she's looking right in his eyes. She's not looking down. She's not looking around. People are staring at her. She's not moving. Her eyes are set on her man, and she's just walking towards her destination. And as she's walking towards him, she's making progress. She's taking one step at a time. And it's incredible. Because at the end, she made it, and we all clapped for her. It was so cool. But look at what happens here. Peter, he's walking on the water, and I think he's kind of like this lady trying to walk across this tightrope. And I believe he's looking into Jesus' eyes, and as he's walking towards him, look at what happens next. Can we turn to this next verse? It says this. But when listen, this is crazy. He said, but when he saw the wind. We don't even see wind. We don't see. The wind is not visible. I can't even see the wind. But this man, when he saw the wind, things around him start to change, and things are happening, and something's pushing him. And it says when he saw the wind, which means he wasn't looking at the wind before. He was probably looking at Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. He saw the wind. He was afraid. And when he started to fear, and when he started to look at the problem rather than the purpose and the thing that he's walking towards, he starts to sink. And he cried out, Lord, save me. Oh, man. Wouldn't it have been so nice if the story had ended? Can we go back to that last verse? Wouldn't it have been so nice if the story ended right here? And Peter just got out of the boat and he started to walk towards Jesus. We're like, yeah, Peter, you did it. Clap for you, just like that lady walking across the tightrope. But that's not what happened. Why? Because the Bible was written as a book for people like me who fail, who don't do it right every time, who can't make it across the tightrope, because it's written for real people in a real time. It's not just some made-up book. It's really a book for us to connect to. And this man, Peter, is just like many of us who maybe at one point I knew Jesus. At one point I thought he's awesome. But listen, things are happening around me. I have a job. I have family issues. I have senses of oh my gosh, I cannot feel any sort of purpose in this place. Nobody cares. Nobody sees me. My job is not fulfilling me. My work, my school, my friends, things are just not giving me the purpose or the drive that I want. And this is what's happening. Peter is looking at Jesus, and he's got his eyes set on his purpose and takes some steps. But he's just like one of us. At least he's like me. Where things are not perfect. Where the storms come, where the wind comes, and even sometimes I'll walk through the storm a little bit. I'm like, yeah, Jesus, I'm walking. I've got my purpose set on you. And then something happens. I got in a car accident. I dropped out of school. My friends betrayed me. My family left. Whatever it is, something happened, and it started to pull me away, and I began to sink. But listen, immediately cried out, Jesus, Lord, save me. And I love this. Oh, go on to the next verse. It says this, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. He wasn't going to let him drown. He called for help. He's reaching up. He's like, Jesus, please. And Jesus reaches down, grabs his arm. He pulls him up. He's not going to let him drown. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And I just picture myself, right, on this obstacle course with my guy, Leroy. Every time I go and I get past one obstacle, I'm like, why? Please make it stop. And I look back. And I see him, and I see the joy in his heart, and the smile on his face, and the way that he's screaming and yelling and excited. I'm like, there's purpose there. There's purpose there. Peter saw purpose through the storm, and he's walking towards Jesus, but things go haywire. He starts to drown, but Jesus is still there. He picks them up. He pulls them out. Keep going. Why do you doubt? And then this is literally my number one favorite part of this incredible story. I mean, if that story in itself is not enough, listen, Jesus pulled him out. He saved him. I imagine him putting his arm around Peter, and he's like, all right, man, it's all good. Like, we're still in it together. And they start walking back to the boat, and they get back in the boat. And that's how I've always pictured it. You know, like, okay, like, things went well, and it was good. They made it back. But here's the question, right? Like, when does the storm stop? When did this storm stop? Right? Because I've always pictured it. Peter's in the water, and Jesus reaches out his hand, and he pulls him up out of the water, and he's got him on his shoulder, and he's like, all right, dude, stop. Just stop the waves, stop the wind, and they walk back. But check it out. That's not what happens. I had never seen this for like 26 years, right? Nobody ever pointed me to this. But listen, look at when the storm stopped. It said, when they climbed into the boat. When they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. No, this is crazy. When did the storm stop? Listen, we sometimes think, all right, I got my purpose in Christ, and I'm walking towards Him, and everything's going to be perfect, and I'm walking my way, and I'm believing in Him, I'm believing for miracles, I'm believing for new things, and it's going to be great. And so now that I'm in Him, everything's going to be perfect. There's a storm. Peter made it all the way to Jesus. You would expect the storm to stop, but listen, they start to walk back together through the storm. And I love this because this is what I picture as like the perfect example of what life really is. And what life really is, living our purpose with Jesus. That even though things might not be going our way, Peter still made it back to the boat. There was problems going on around him. Listen, his friends were all in the boat, terrified. They were in the moment where they were going through the same exact problem that he was, but he said, all right, I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to cry and complain and do whatever. I'm going to take a step. And he's walking back in the middle of the storm with Jesus. And when we have a purpose perspective, we can walk through the largest storms. Because we know that as we're walking, we're not walking alone. That Jesus right there, He's got our arm around us, and every step that we take, He's there with us. And I love it. I love it. I love it. Because this is something that I don't think just happened once. I think it's something that's a promise for all of us. Because that same verse that said the enemy, the thief, has come to steal, kill, and destroy, and he's trying to come after you. He's trying to steal your purpose. The next line says, but Jesus has come to give life and life to the full. Yeah, you might not have perfect life and the things that you've always dreamed of, but listen, even those small things that nobody sees, the things that are almost annoying to you, and it's like, I can't believe that this is my situation right now. I can't believe that this is how I'm feeling, and I thought this would give me purpose, and it's not. There is a purpose through the problem. And when we have a purpose perspective, we can see that, and we can see Jesus, we can walk through any storm. Okay, so here's my last point. Right, so that's awesome. They walk back in the storm. And listen, so the first point, right, is a purpose perspective lets you see who Jesus really is. The second point, a purpose perspective lets you walk through any storm. And the third one is something that we kind of touched on last time we were together. A purpose, we said, I told you about this book that I was reading. And the guy wrote, he's talking about how do you find your purpose in your life. And the first 4 words in this book, maybe you remember this, said, it's not about you. Like, man, you're writing a book about my purpose and you're telling me it's not about me? Come on, get it straight. But we see right here, when we have a purpose perspective is not focused on you. And look at it. When they got back in the boat, Peter and Jesus got back in the boat, and then it says this, then those who were in the boat worshipped Him. him as in Jesus, not as in Peter. Peter, you did great, dude. Bravo. They worship Jesus, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. That's my last point, right? It's not about having a purpose perspective is not about you. And when we see that and when we believe that, it's ultimately not pointing to us. And what I love about the story is it actually kind of reminds me of Christmas. Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas. Go outside. So Christmas, right? There's a story about God coming to earth. And here in this story, there's a man and he's walking through some problems and he's suffering. But he sees a purpose through his suffering and this problem that he's walking through, and he sees Jesus, right? And so Jesus, the whole story of Jesus, he came down from heaven to earth to live among people, and he suffered and he was tortured. And so yes, it reminds us of like, okay, Jesus came and he was willing to suffer because he saw a purpose. But listen, it's not only reminding us of Christmas, but it's also reminding us of the cross. And I was challenged to think about this and challenged to think about how does this tie to Jesus on the cross. And listen, this is what I saw, and I really feel like God has given me a revelation with this. What he's saying, what I'm seeing here, what I believe that God could be communicating to us tonight, is that Jesus, when he died on the cross, we read this verse in Hebrews 4, and I don't have it up there. I think it's 12 actually. Hebrews 12:4. And it says this. It says that it was for the joy set before him that he endured the cross. Now, I'm going to break it down for a second. Jesus died the most gruesome, torturous death known to mankind. And he could have come down from that cross in an instant. I love this. I think it's N.T. Wright, and he writes, Jesus was not a victim on the cross. He was a volunteer. He could have come down from that cross, but he decided, I'm going to stay on that cross because even though I'm suffering, there is a joy set before me. There is a purpose that I have that will allow me to endure the suffering that I'm walking through. And when we see this picture, we see not only are we going to suffer in life and there are things that are going to happen and we are challenged as people who maybe are wrestling with this God and saying, do I want to follow him? That yes, there is purpose even in the mundane, even in the trouble, even in the hard times. And listen, we are not alone in this. Jesus himself suffered. He himself suffered, but he saw the purpose, and his purpose was the salvation of all mankind. His purpose was to save us, and now our purpose is to glorify him and make him known to others. So his purpose was for us, and our purpose is for him. And when we have a purpose perspective, we realize it's not about me. Listen, this is a fun story. I'm trying to wrestle with like, okay, how do I have a purpose perspective in my life? And so I go to the gym. I try to go to the gym. Okay, I can't say I go to the gym. I try to go to the gym. And I start to think, how can I start to go to the gym and make it not about me? Because if I'm living this way and I'm trying to live this truth out, then my purpose is not about me. Even me going to the gym, how can it be less about me and more about God? So I start to go to the gym right down the street here, the YMCA, Parkway YMCA. And I start to think, all right, God, give me some opportunities to make it about you and less about me. And so I start to meet some people. And then I met this man named Mike Melky over here, biggest man in the room, can bench us 4 times more than I do. And I met Mike, and Mike, literally every time I walk in the gym, he's like, yo, Kika, meet this guy. He knows every single human being in the gym. Like, I don't think there's a single person that walks to the gym that Mike doesn't know. He's like, yo, him? Yeah, he's cool. Him? Don't talk to him. He knows everybody. And so I'm kind of like partnered with Mike. And I love what he's doing because I see Mike, he's like, yo, John Calvin, what you doing tonight? Like, nothing. He's like, come to church with us. I'm like, Mike, you're inspiring me, man. Like, this is amazing. And so, single-handedly, I think Mike has brought more people to church than I have in my entire life. Just because I think he sees that, man, it's not about me. Even at the gym, it's not about me. And so I'm trying to do what Mike's doing. And I'm trying to meet people. I'm trying to be like, yo, come with us. We're hanging out. We got a young adults gathering. It doesn't have to be these big, massive things that we're doing, but like purpose, having a purpose perspective is like, okay, I've got to do this paperwork for the next 12 hours. Maybe I can sit next to this guy who kind of smells a little bad and is eating stew that is 3 days old, but I'm going to sit next to him so maybe we can have some conversation. And who knows where it'll go. Who knows what opportunities God will open, but when we live with a perspective, a purpose perspective, we realize that it's not about us. That ultimately it's about Jesus, and ultimately, in the end, our hope is that people will see our lives, the good and the bad, and especially the bad, and they'll worship Jesus through it. When we live with a purpose perspective, we see who Jesus really is. When we live with a purpose perspective, we can walk through the biggest of storms. The biggest word? I don't know. When we have a purpose perspective, it's not right. Anyway, when we have a purpose perspective, largest, biggest, it is a word. Dude, I haven't been in grammar in a while. Anyway, purpose perspective, it's not about you. And I challenge us, as we go into 2020, you guys are my friends. As we go into 2020, how can we live a life with a purpose perspective that even through the storm, even through the mundane, even through the boring, even when we don't feel like anyone sees what we're doing and it doesn't matter, and we're going through the hardest times, we can see the purpose that we're walking towards. We can set our eyes on it, and no matter the storms that are coming, we're not going to look at the wind. We're not going to look at the haters. We're not going to look at the grades, maybe every once in a while. We're not going to look at the problems. We're going to focus on Jesus because He is our purpose. And He will give us a fulfilling life if we set our eyes on Him. So as the worship team comes back up and gives us a time to reflect, I want to challenge you. Please, take a couple of seconds, take a couple of minutes. And I know we all have issues, right? We all have things that we go through. We all have problems that we face. But as young adults, this is one of the most formative times in people's lives. We can have an impact in their lives. So if it's not about me, if my purpose is not about me, and it's really about other people seeing what God is doing in my life and glorifying Him, I pray, Jesus, please use me. If He can do it in the gym, He can do it in school, He can do it at home, He can do it at work, He can do it in our internships, He can do it at the Apple store, He can do it wherever. But God wants to give us purpose. He wants us to set our eyes on Him. So I'm going to give us just a couple minutes and just pray that you would take the time. Maybe for some of you it's the first time like sitting and talking to God, but here I'm gonna give you a kind of a disclaimer, right? Talking to God that's it. That's just you have a conversation. You say, God, thank you for who you are. Thank you for bringing me here tonight. Thank you for people. Thank you for my life. I don't really know you yet, maybe. Maybe it's my first time ever talking to you, but God, I think maybe you might exist. Maybe you might be listening to me. And maybe tonight, I want to say, maybe things aren't perfect, but I want to live with more purpose. I want to set my eyes on you. I want to walk through the storms. I want to see you for who you really are. And I want to have my life be all about you. going to just sing one more song, and you can just stay reflecting. You don't have to sing. You don't have to stand. You don't have to do anything. I just challenge you in the next couple minutes as we sing this song. I pray that God would speak to you. I pray that God would speak to you about the challenges that are happening, the things that you're walking through. And maybe you don't face a lot of challenges right now. That's awesome. That's awesome. But I pray that you would see your purpose is really, you will only find fulfillment. I was reading a book, a finance book, and the man was saying, he's not a Christian, but he was saying, yo, this man is a multi-millionaire. And he said, even when I reached the peak of my financial height, and I was with other people who were meeting the peak of their financial height, they couldn't find fulfillment in that. He said the only way that you can start to find fulfillment when it's not about you. This is a non-Christian man. And he said those words. Maybe the world, even if they're not Christians, is onto something. Maybe it's not about us. Maybe it's really focused on Jesus, a God who loves, who cares, who is willing to suffer for the joy set before him.